What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Lights Out. I'm your host, Josh.
And I'm your host, Austin.
And I'm Daniel.
And we're back with our regularly scheduled content this week. I know we kind of went off the beaten path a bit last week, and it was a very interesting conversation we had.
What are your thoughts after a week later?
I think I'm still very open to it. Can I say I was like 100% convinced by the things that she was saying? Not necessarily. Although to give her the benefit of the doubt, it's kind of a weird, spot to be in, to try to read people, and you're in front of cameras, and we've been talking for 2 hours, and
you're in this room.
Exactly.
Things are a little strange.
She's kind of out of her element, I think.
Yeah.
But I think there was a lot of very interesting dialogue that happened, and I'm very open to, talking to future psychic mediums.
For sure.
But it was definitely a blast, and it seemed like a lot of you really enjoyed it, and some of you not so much, and that's okay. I think it's all about trying new things here, and it's like, if I feel like there's somebody we can have an interesting discussion with, why not bring them on and talk through it? It doesn't mean that you have to love it, or maybe you did. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see who else we pull onto the show in the future. I do like having guests on. I think it's a nice change from our normal content, and just allows us to be a little bit more open and kind of get into some topics. It was definitely a little bit lighter than our normal content, which is nice for us, I think, because it can get pretty dark.
Yeah, because, I don't know, talking to a psychic, it's kind of nice. We don't have to deal with like any macabre, disgusting content, which can be, appropriate for different episodes, and I'm still cool with it. But yeah, sometimes we need a little breather here on Lights Out.
Yeah. I mean, to do this week in, week out, I mean, it gets pretty dark. And speaking of which, we're headed back into the darkness today. With a very interesting case for you. We're going to be talking about a priest who, from what it looks like, he murdered a nun of his own church.
Yeah. And
there's this very weird occult ritual spin to this that is kind of confusing. I still don't know where I stand.
Yeah, and even the prosecution didn't really want to lean into it because they were worried about credibility and whatnot. So you kind of have to take the occult aspect with a grain of salt. But I don't know. I think there's some convincing things that line up, and it might be worth noting at least.
But we're obviously going to be talking about the Catholic Church with this one, and the kind of briefly touching on the serious cover-up, that it's been ongoing for, probably since the very beginning, I would imagine.
And if any of our listeners are, followers of the Catholic faith, we're not coming at your faith. We're coming at the organizational aspect of the church that should be critiqued. I think that's totally fair. So don't jump down our throats. We're not coming at your spirituality or your faith or your belief in God. We're coming at the church here.
The establishment. Yeah. I mean, when a murder happens inside the church and there's a seemingly attempt to cover up evidence or destroy evidence in order to protect the accused, I think that it's a big, big problem.
Yes.
I think out of all the places in the world, the church should be the most transparent. And unfortunately, across all religions too, not just the Catholic faith, but churches seem to want to protect their own, and especially protect those in positions of power, because ultimately they don't want people, following the trail, and it gets pretty dark at times. So yeah, this is a very interesting case. We're going to be talking about Father Gerald Robinson and the murder of Sister Margaret Pahl. But one other quick thing I wanted to, or actually two quick things I wanted to mention. We're cruising on our way to 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. So thank you to everybody who subscribed. If you should go check, because we had a lot of people say they weren't subscribed to the Lights Out YouTube channel anymore, and YouTube seems to be wanting to prevent us from reaching our goals here. So go check out your subscription on YouTube and see if you're subscribed, and maybe you're not. Help us get to that 500,000 goal this year and make us very happy. Also, I wanted to mention one other quick thing. So recently, I think a couple episodes ago, I maybe talked about my CBD company, Higher Love Wellness, and I have some exciting news to announce that I have partnered up with another company here in Colorado called Extract Labs. Basically, Higher Love Wellness is now owned by Extract Labs, and Extract Labs is a fantastic company that's made a lot of our CBD products over the years. And I'm very excited to announce that partnership because it's just going to enable us to offer our customers a widespread of different hemp-derived products, including hemp-derived Delta-8, Delta-9. So maybe you're somebody who, maybe it's just too potent, the stuff that they sell down in those dispensaries these days. The hemp-derived stuff is a little bit more chill, a little bit more, it's just, I prefer it now. Like I just can't handle the serious stuff from the dispensaries anymore for the paranoia. And it's too potent in my opinion, a lot of times. So the hemp-derived stuff's really, really good. But there's a wide range of different products on there, from vapes to gummies to topicals, oils, you name it. Extract Labs has it. And I have a code to get 10% off your order that's lights out over there at extractlabs.com. It's legal in all 50 states. Really, really high quality. It's all hemp farmed here in Colorado. It's all made, extracted, and products are formulated here in Colorado as well. I'm still very involved with the company as well. So yeah, go check it out, extractlabs.com, and use code LIGHTSOUT. But let's go ahead and jump into this case, starting with Margaret Ann Pahl, the victim. So going back to the very beginning, Margaret Ann Pahl was born on April 6, 1908 in Edgerton, Ohio. It was a small town of about 1,000 people. Her parents were Frank and Catherine Pahl, and she was the fourth child in a large, devout Catholic family of 9 children. The Pahl family owned 200 acres of farmland where they grew wheat and corn. They also raised cows, horses, and chickens, and they had no electricity, which is really hard to imagine these days. I freak out whenever the power goes out for like 2 minutes. I'm like, Wi-Fi, no.
Yeah. Oh, my chicken in the fridge is going bad.
Right, yeah. It's such a luxury that we have these days. But the children often had to wake up early in the morning before school to tend to the crops and animals, and her siblings said that Margaret had a normal childhood, growing up in a staunch Catholic family, and she already had a few cousins who were already nuns. Margaret expressed interest in devoting her life to God from an early age. When she was 19 years old in 1927, she packed up her things in the family's Buick and headed on up to Fremont, Ohio. She left behind one of her most valuable belongings, though, an intricate red jewelry box to her little sister Mary. Margaret then officially joined the Sisters of Mercy at Our Lady of the Pines. She then took the religious name Sister Mary Annunciata, and from there she began her life as a sister just across from the Sandusky River, surrounded by 63 acres of forest. The Sisters of Mercy was a religious Roman Catholic order that began in Dublin, Ireland in 1831. They took vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and service. Original nuns in convents would spend most of their time indoors praying, but when the Sisters of Mercy entered the scene, they would be seen walking through town, actively seeking out and helping those in need. Locals called them the walking nuns, but they technically weren't nuns at all. They were sisters, an apostolic community of women who combined a life of prayer with a life of active ministry. And by the time Margaret joined the ranks in 1927, the sisters' main goal was opening hospitals to help the poor, especially women and children. Many of the sisters would work as nurses at these hospitals, including Margaret. In fact, 4 of the 5 Pahl sisters would become nurses, and over the next several decades, Margaret continued working at several hospitals, making her way up the ladder. Over time, she would become a registered nurse, the director of a nursing school, and a supervisor of a medical and surgical floor, and the administrator of 2 hospitals. So just a total badass.
Yeah, that's huge.
Clearly very, very intelligent, and again, dedicating your life to service in more ways than one,
Yeah.
Not only spiritually, but also, through medicine, which is really, really cool. According to the other sisters, Sister Margaret didn't have many hobbies outside of her work. She enjoyed opera music, and she'd often return to Edgerton to visit her family, but she spent most of her free time doing as much as she could for the Sisters of Mercy, and of course the Catholic Church. She was highly respected in her community, and some thought she had a dominant personality. She was strict and strong when teaching the other sisters about nursing. And fast forward a few decades, Margaret was transferred to St. Charles Medical Center, also called Mercy Hospital. In 1971, at the age of 63, she wasn't quite ready to retire, but she didn't want the stress of her usual positions in the local hospitals. So this time, she took the role as a caretaker of the hospital's 2 chapels, a much less stressful role than her previous ones. And as the years passed, she also began struggling with her hearing. So this would be a role that would eventually ease her into retirement after many years in religious healthcare work. At the time, she lived in a dorm on the top floor of the hospital with 16 other sisters, and most of them working as nurses. Many of them had already left the hospital for the holiday, and in 1980, Easter Sunday would fall on April 6th, the day of Sister Margaret's 72nd birthday. And normally the day before, Holy Saturday, she would be down in the hospital chapel getting everything ready. Since there was no early morning chapel service on Holy Saturday, she was able to take her time. Her timeline of events had been carefully documented. She set her alarm for 5 a.m. Saturday morning. She then made her way to a switchboard downstairs, and at around 6:15, she was seen in the dining area. She took a dining tray and walked a short distance to a storage closet, and here she gathered cloths and incense for the chapel. According to another sister, she had been stressed about the condition of the chapel all Easter weekend. She then took a tray of supplies to the chapel and set them on a pew. She returned to the dining area around 6:20 and had a quick breakfast. Then she told a cafeteria worker she was headed to St. Joseph's Chapel, the main chapel in the hospital. She left the dining room for a final time at 6:45 a.m., and it's assumed she went straight to the chapel to begin preparing. Here she would restock the wine, communion wafers, and incense. Meanwhile, Sister Madeline Marie Gordon was another nurse who lived on the 7th floor of the hospital, which operated as the convent. She was the organist for the main chapel, and that day she slept in an hour later than usual. By the time she went down to eat, Margaret was already in the chapel getting things ready. When Sister Madeline eventually made it into the chapel, she found an out-of-place folded altar cloth in the hallway. The cloth had been folded in a way that made Sister Madeline have no clue that there was actually several bloodstains across it. She placed the cloth on one of the nearby pews. She then went to check on her organ sheet music, which she would play later in the afternoon. And she noticed that one of the songs was missing and couldn't find it anywhere in the chapel. So she needed to call Father Robinson, the chaplain, to ask if he had taken the sheet music. She then headed to the sacristy first to check if they were stored there. This is the room where the priest would normally prepare for service, but as she pulled at the door, she noticed it was locked, which seemed very strange. Luckily, a skeleton key had been left in the lock of the second door to the sacristy. Right as she opened the door to the 11 by 17-foot room, the room was dark. Someone had lowered the blinds. As she shuffled to turn on the lights, that's when she found Sister Margaret lying on the polished marble floor, face up. Her arms had been folded across her torso, her dress had been pushed up to her chest, and her undergarments had been pulled down. She also had been stabbed countless times, and it was clear that she was dead. Sister Madeline Marie Gordon bolted from the room screaming, which again, this has got to be the absolute last thing you would ever expect to walk into.
Yeah. Horrific.
So the sacristy is it like an office, like for the priest, or is it actually like a spiritual room? Like what's its purpose?
It's for the priest to get his robes and his
it's like a dressing room kind of?
Yeah, essentially. And sometimes there's just few things here and there, maybe another pair of shoes, but it's mostly just the preparation room for the priest. In chapels, sometimes they store other things there because obviously there's only so much room in a chapel. So they might, that's why the sister was going to check if the sheet music was in there.
So it's kind of like a storage closet in a way? Okay.
Yeah, in a changing room, stuff like that. So at the time that Sister Madeline Marie Gordon had bolted from the chapel, 2 police officers had been eating lunch in the hospital cafeteria, and they were called to the scene. When they arrived, one of the hospital's doctors was checking her pulse and vital signs, and they unfortunately confirmed that she was, in fact, dead. Homicide detectives soon arrived. They later confirmed that not only was Sister Margaret murdered, but her autopsy would later reveal she had abrasions that suggested sexual assault with a foreign object. She had been stabbed 31 times, and 9 of these stab wounds were noted to be in the shape of an inverted cross in her torso. The medical examiner also noted that her hyoid bone had been broken, which suggested possible strangulation. They concluded that strangulation was the cause of her death and the killer most likely had large hands, and that the stab wounds were possibly inflicted post-mortem. Near the chapel, investigators also discovered a blood-stained altar cloth. It also had several punctures in the fabric, so the killer might have placed the cloth over Sister Margaret's body before stabbing her. Investigators questioned dozens of potential suspects and witnesses, including all of the sisters who remained in the hospital through the Easter Sunday holiday. This also included the two chaplains, and they were Father Jerome Swiatecki and Father Gerald Robinson. On the morning of Sister Margaret's death, a hospital administrator was questioned by police, and they claimed they had called Father Gerald Robinson at his on-site apartment that morning, which was inside the hospital. They told him what had happened and requested that he come to the chapel. He told them he would get dressed and head over, but never arrived, which was suspicious, so police tracked him down. Meanwhile, it was estimated that over 200 mourners attended Sister Margaret's funeral. She was buried in the Our Lady of the Pines Cemetery. Father Jerome Swiatecki, the Mercy Hospital chaplain who helped celebrate her funeral mass, called the death, quote, not only blasphemous, but patently absurd. Father Robinson also joined in the funeral mass. He was eventually picked up by police and driven to the police station 13 days after the murder on April 18th. Detective Arthur Marks questioned him for nearly 8 hours, and they started with Gerald detailing nearly his entire life. They started from the beginning. So Gerald John Robinson was born on April 14th, 1938 in Toledo, Ohio, to John and Mary Robinson, who were staunch Polish-American Catholics. Mary was known as a rigid mother, but she was ecstatic when her son decided to become a man of the cloth. That was a big deal to her.
What is this man of the cloth?
It's another word for a priest. It's just a term for
man of the cloth.
Man of the cloth.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Do they like that term, or is that kind of like
it's a respectful term.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, I could see that being like a dig at them or something like.
Oh yeah.
Like belittling them in a way, but interesting that's like.
He's a man of the cloth.
Is it the clothes being the cloth, or the cloth they wear around their neck?
That's a good question.
Because
we should look this up.
I'm curious, why do they call it the man of the cloth?
I've never, in all my years of growing up Catholic, I never even questioned why.
But they don't like introduce priests like, and now the man of the cloth.
No, it's like
Father Gerald Robinson.
It's more of just a term. Man of the cloth refers to a clergyman, minister, priest, or other religious leader.
The writer Jonathan Swift first used the cloth to refer to the clergy in 1710.
So
it's just kind of an old term
to refer to them who wore a uniform of distinctive clothing for their profession.
Okay.
So that's it. Man of the cloth.
This episode is sponsored by Stamps.com, a longtime sponsor of the show. These guys have freed up so much time in my schedule, as well as saved me thousands of dollars over the years. I've been using Stamps.com to ship merch for probably like 4 or 5 years. Been using it for my CBD company as well to ship all of your guys' packages. And I got to say, I don't know what I do without it. It's made mailing and shipping so much easier. Plus, I save so much money. It gives you all the capabilities of the post office right there in your home or office. All you need is a computer and a printer. And if you use our code, they'll even send you a free digital scale. So you have everything you need. Once you get your Stamps.com account set up, you can schedule pickups right through the dashboard, which I absolutely love. So there's no driving to the post office, waiting in line for an hour just to mail something. It's so much easier, and it's open 24/7. So you can get all your mailing, packaging needs taken care of whenever you want. Not only that, but Stamps.com gives you rates you can't find anywhere else, like up to 89% off USPS and UPS. So you get crazy discounts you can't find anywhere else. You can even order shipping and mailing supplies, labels, and even printers from their supply store. So take advantage of this special offer from Stamps.com and access the USPS and UPS mailing services you need for your business right from your computer or phone, anytime, day or night. No lines, no traffic, no waiting. Free up more time for more important business with Stamps.com. Sign up at Stamps.com and enter code LIGHTSOUT. There's no space in that for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, plus free postage and that free digital scale. There's no long-term commitments or contracts. That's Stamps.com. Use code LIGHTSOUT.
So Gerald attended St. Mary's High School in Orchard Lake Village, Michigan, about 60 miles north of Toledo, which I know where that is. It's not far from where I grew up, actually. This was originally a boys-only preparatory school built for Polish-American boys to train for the priesthood, and after graduation, he attended the Byzantine Catholic Seminary of Saints Cyril and Methodius in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This seminary also educated the men with an emphasis on Polish culture, which is crazy because that's kind of that's my family.
Oh,
It's
really?
Polish Catholic, yeah. And there was a lot of Polish people around Detroit, Hamtramck, in
Interesting.
this time period.
Is there any like push in, I've always wondered this in Catholic school, especially like Catholic high school, is there ever like a push to get young men to go to seminary?
In my school, no. Because mine, it was a preparatory school. So it was mostly like, I mean, they were all for it if you wanted to become a priest.
Do you know anybody that became a priest?
The only person I know was, I think 2 or 3 years older than I was. And he's still a priest to this day. He later became like an army chaplain and he's a priest now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it was kind of rare for people to become priests coming out of Shrine Catholic.
So there's some like a preparatory school, meaning prepping you for college. Then
Yeah. They had a big emphasis on going to college.
what is it? Do they push you at all towards like a Catholic college or?
Yeah, I mean, they were around. I think Rochester College in Michigan was, I believe, a Catholic college, but no, they didn't really.
Notre Dame?
Notre Dame was a big one. I think I did 2 people in my graduating class who went to Notre Dame. That was a big one. But there was they were mostly just happy if you were interested in college and wanted to go. That was the whole thing. They were like, they prided themselves on, they had something like 98, 99% graduation to college. So they were like basically guaranteeing that your kid will go to college after you graduate from.
Do you feel like you got a good education?
I do, honestly.
I feel like I know here in Colorado, some of the top high schools are either Christian or Catholic based schools.
Yeah.
And they usually have exceptional sports teams as well.
Yeah, we had some trash sports teams.
Really?
Yeah. Where they always wanted us to like, they really, really wanted our sports to take off. Because that's how you draw a lot of talent to the school. You get a lot of attention. There's a lot of money that flows through sports. But we just never really could do it in the sports realm.
Because it's a private school, right?
Yeah.
So you pay tuition, or your parents pay tuition for it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's how they are here too.
Yeah, and it was a good education. And hey, even with my Catholic upbringing, a lot of my religion classes in high school, like they fairly critiqued historically the atrocities that.
Oh, did they? I was going to ask that.
Yeah, the Spanish Inquisition and the terrible things that certain missionaries had done, and they were very open about it. And they differentiated between historical truth, biblical truth. Like we got it into the weeds pretty hard.
And you said they teach evolution?
Yeah, but it's not, I'm going to blank on the term for it.
There's like a specific kind of twist to it.
It's evolution, but it's deemed by God.
Right.
So it's like, yes, we do believe that we can't, like if you trace our genetic line back, yeah, we were, going back to the apes and even before that, the Catholic Church is really pro that. It is called intelligent design. And the entire thing is like, God is like, he's a bit hands off, but it's like, this is my doing, but I've kind of initiated this whole thing to happen. That's what it is. Intelligent design.
Makes a lot more sense than Earth's 12,000 years old.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that field trip to Fossil Ridge.
Oh,
and getting the creationist look on history. And like, I went to public school and, I got hundreds of millions of years, when talking about the dinosaur ages, and then to go on this and be like, yeah, like 12,000 years ago, T-Rex was walking through this valley right here. And
damn.
I'm like, what?
Well, yeah. And I know there are some where they don't even believe they're real. It's like, no, God put these here to test us, but dinosaurs never roamed the earth. I know that's a big thing too.
These fossils we're finding fake
news.
Planted.
Man. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a grand conspiracy. But yeah, all in all, I mean, I think a part of me being so positive about Catholic school is because it was also incredibly difficult for me to go. So it wasn't all just like flowers.
Yeah.
Like, this is great. We're learning and we're critiquing our history. Like, there was a lot of oppressive shit to it as well that I couldn't handle, and sweeping under the rug the sexual abuse where that was never really like discussed that much, which I was always frustrated with. So obviously, but
I remember going to Catholic Mass for the first time and hearing about this whole concept of altar boys. And I was like, this just seems very weird to me.
Yeah.
Like young boys, and they're obviously like helping the priest with service and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was an altar boy for a little bit, because my dad's whole side of the family is Catholic. And so he kind of told me, and he had very negative experiences, hence why he left the faith. Nothing like really, really, really bad, but just feeling uncomfortable in some of those situations. And just, I don't know, there's just something about that. You just don't see that really in other religions. So it's just kind of weird. But then when you know about all of the sexual abuse, you're like, well, these guys are in these situations.
Yeah.
And kids are in vulnerable positions.
Yeah. I was never an altar boy. I did have friends who were altar boys though. And at least at my church, as far as I know, nothing odd was going on. But yeah, it is a bit strange. I get it's like, oh, it's a way to incorporate younger people into the mass, where you're not just a person sitting in the pew, you're actually involved with it. And girls could do it too. There were girls up there. I don't know specifically what the nomenclature for like their position was, but there were girls in there as well. It was mostly just to get the younger people involved.
Yeah.
So I think in spirit, it was an innocent tradition. But knowing the Catholic Church, yeah, it definitely casts a shadow on what an altar boy is. But yeah, roping it back to Polish culture and the Roman Catholic Church and Father Gerald, in order to become a Roman Catholic priest, you must give up the luxuries of a layman. And often this involves committing yourself to celibacy. You sacrifice your worldly possessions and your romantic relationships. And after recognizing your call from God, you study in a seminary, which includes the study of scripture, theology, philosophy. It's basically college, but it's just for priests. And when all is said and done, you are officially called to a life of service to others.
So is the celibate, I've always wondered about the celibacy thing. Is that so that you can be totally committed to God without distractions?
Yeah.
Just like,
yeah, I think
I don't get it.
I think their relationship with sex is like, one, in the Catholic Church, you have sex to procreate. That is it. If you are having sex for
pleasure and
no,
health,
the pleasure
benefits.
is a very secondary priority. You should be having sex to have children and to make more Catholics,
right?
Like that,
which is why they frown upon birth control, and obviously not all, but
right.
I always heard that, right? Like, birth control. Is kind of like,
that was one of my big gripes in like our health class, where they kind of tiptoed around the use of condoms and
interesting
and things like that, but while still trying to be a bit progressive and keep the students safe. But it was always like, we know about it. Like, we're watching TV. We know about what this is, but yeah, they always tiptoed around things like that. And yeah, it was, you don't have sex till marriage is a big part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, sex, I don't honestly, I think we could fix a lot of the problems in the Catholic Church if you allowed priests to get married. And I was just saying, if women could become priests, I think it would just solve a lot of the issues that they have. It's a very antiquated.
Yeah. And that's what it really stems from, right? It's just this rule has been in place
forever,
since like the beginning, right?
And the cool thing about the Roman Catholic Church is it is so old, and that's kind of when I think about it, the mystique of it, and like having these cathedrals that are like hundreds of years old and they're beautiful.
And they wear like pretty extravagant, like the priests wear like hats.
Yeah, they got the robes.
the
Well, like
robes.
the bishops have.
Oh, the bishops wear the
like,
hats?
The higher ranking you are, the crazier you get to look.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because there's like cardinals and like, there's like a whole hierarchy.
Exactly.
Which is always interesting.
And like, I like the ideas of tradition. That's the cool part about it. But that's also why things are so slow to change. It's because everything's rooted in this tradition that should never change. There's a lot of like conservative mindsets, not in the sense of like politically conservative, but conservative in the sense that we need to maintain tradition.
Yeah. Which is why Pope Francis was such
People
a
hate
game
that.
changer. Yeah.
People do not like Pope Francis. I love him, but people do not like Pope Francis for that exact reason, because he was progressive and wanted to change certain things in the church.
I'm reading this on Wikipedia, and according to Jason Berry of the New York Times, the requirement of celibacy is not dogma. It is a law that was adopted in the Middle Ages because Rome was worried that the cleric's children would inherit church property and create dynasties.
Wow. So it's a control power move
to
type of thing.
You have to keep the money and the power in the church instead of having it be split up.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
That does.
Like, we don't want to pay child support.
Well, yeah, they don't want like the child of a priest to not be part of the church and just take the church property and go away. They want it to stay in the church.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow.
Yeah. But I did want to make one note about like circling back to the progressiveness, where it's like, man, if we kept everything the same, we would still be having Catholic Church in Latin. We wouldn't even know what's going on. And like a lot of people didn't know what was going on. They just sat there and listened and prayed because they were like, I don't know Latin. And then it wasn't until I think I looked this up, it was the 60s when they finally said like, wait a minute, maybe we should start incorporating the language of the region into Mass. I was like, but people resented that. The hardcore conservatives were like, no, it's been in Latin forever. Why would we change it now? So that's why it's like so slow to get like those incremental changes, which would benefit the church, which is, I think, what they realize is like just having the Mass in English or whatever. But yeah, it's just so slow to change. Too slow, in my opinion, to change, which is why I wasn't having it anymore after a while.
But then there's churches that are too fast.
yeah.
That are like really trying to like.
That's a good point. Yeah. That is
be the really try to get with the times here, and it gets a little over the top. If you listen to the Malhar episode on Hillsong, where it's like going to a rock concert. It's like, it's like so, trying to be so mainstream that things get out of control there as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's a good point. There's probably a happy.
And the money starts flowing and,
always
selling music written by the church, licensing it, and the church is making buku dollars,
Yep.
Then you've got the whole other temptations that come along with that, with fame, power, money, and it just, I can see why they might take the other approach, like if they can keep it controlled and confined and slow roll things, it's a lot easier to control the narrative and probably keep control over the people in power in those positions, as opposed to, churches that are just trying to like grow as quickly as possible and just like crop up new churches. And then before you know it, it gets so out of hand that things start going wrong.
Yeah.
And then the whole church's reputation is absolute trash. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not to say that, the Catholic Church doesn't have a bad reputation, but I think they're just much more, they're protective over it seems.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, it really is.
You stay too far back, it's a problem. You go too far forward, it's a problem. But yeah, sorry we're digging into the Catholic Church here, but it is, that's a lot of my upbringing was involved in the Catholic Church.
And it's hugely important to this case. And I think understanding Father Gerald Robinson too.
Yeah, absolutely. And what they're supposed to be.
Right,
well,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So he was officially ordained on May 30th, 1964, and he began his many years of work in the church as an associate pastor at Christ the King, St. Adalbert in Toledo and St. Michael in Findlay. He also served as a pastor at St. Anthony in Toledo, and eventually he was transferred to his position as a chaplain of Mercy Hospital, and this was the same hospital where Sister Margaret worked. By then, he had been a priest for 16 years at the age of 42. He had become very popular by then, and he was especially well liked in Toledo's Polish neighborhoods because he had delivered some of his sermons in Polish, which I know at this time, if you think about this area, a lot of Polish immigrants were coming into the U.S. at this time, specifically in this area and in the Detroit area as well, not far from Toledo. So they were so happy to have this guy who could also speak Polish and deliver these. And he also heard confessions in Polish as well. And they were kind of getting phased out. So that's why people really rallied for this guy. Considering all this, it seemed like Father Robinson's dedication to his lifestyle and faith would be an absolute contradiction to the violence against Sister Margaret, right? But detectives still had to consider his potential involvement. As for what he claimed he had been doing on the day of the murder, Father Robinson said he had just gotten out of the shower when someone called him and told him what happened to Sister Margaret. He was asked to come to the sacristy, so he got dressed and headed over. This was the general story that he stuck with, and Detective Marks hit a dead end. He couldn't really get any more information out of Father Robinson. But toward the end of the 8-hour interview, Father Robinson blurted out that someone had confessed to Sister Margaret Ann's murder. And this came out of nowhere and seemed like Father Robinson should have probably led with this information if he knew that someone confessed to this murder. Apparently, this mysterious man told Father Robinson this in a private confession. And Detective Marks pressed him to give up the name of the man, but eventually Father Robinson just said, well, I actually just made all this up.
Yeah, like what? The timeline doesn't even make sense.
Right.
When did you do this? Before your shower or after your shower?
Right.
Like,
yeah. Like, or was this like
a couple days ago?
After?
Like,
yeah. I don't get it. He claimed he only lied because he was tired and wanted to go home.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, what the hell? He later claimed he was only trying to deflect from the detective's accusatory tone. Right.
Very suspicious.
The detective couldn't get anything else out of him after exhausting all the questions he could, so they ended up taking Father Robinson home, and still the interview was enough to raise more suspicion. The following morning, detectives arrived to Father Robinson's apartment. He went to visit patients in the hospital as he allowed them to search through his apartment, and here, the detective specifically looked for the murder weapon. According to the autopsy, Sister Margaret had been stabbed with a sharp blade, but not a commonly shaped knife. The wounds weren't from a regular straight blade you could find in maybe a kitchen or something. The scissors that were later discovered in the hospital had already been observed, and the scissor stab wounds would have been close to Sister Margaret's wounds, but not close enough, and the medical examiner wasn't certain what type of blade would have actually caused these unique lacerations. So as the detectives searched through Father Robinson's apartment, they found a letter opener in the shape of a miniature cutlass-style sword.
Which, what the hell kind of letter opener is this, man?
This is kind of sweet, but
this is,
like it's so strange. I've never seen a letter opener like that.
My grandparents had one like this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was a straight one. It was like a miniature ornamental sword.
How big?
Okay.
Oh, maybe like 6 inches.
Yeah.
Seems a bit dangerous to just open a mail with.
Yeah, right.
Good God. Like, what kind of, it's a piece of paper you're opening.
I know. That's why I find it so funny, because back then, I think it was just more common back in the day to have your letter openers and make it really clean cut. Also, you were just getting way more mail because we didn't have computers and shit. So everything was through snail mail. So it's like if you had to open a bunch of letters throughout the day, it would make sense to have that letter opener. Because now I'm like, oh, it's one from they're trying to offer me a credit card. And another one's whatever. I just tear it open and then throw it out. But I guess they were just more practical back in the day.
Yeah, I bought some from Amazon recently. It's like a tiny little blade, and it's
really?
like all like protected, other than like the very end of it that you just run through the top of the envelope.
Probably because they've had safety
people
concerns
have
with
cut
the
their
bigger
fingers
ones.
off with these things. Like, I just like can't imagine, like you're just like slowly using this miniature sword to open the letter. Like,
yeah, speaking of strange traditions, we should have gotten rid of
yeah, what the hell is
massive
this?
letter openers.
It looks like a dagger.
It really does. It looks like, yeah, a weapon, really.
And I assume it's probably pretty sharp too.
Yeah.
So it just can cut through that paper real easily.
Right. They discovered it was actually from a wax museum in Washington, D.C. As they inspected the blade, there was no trace of blood, but what made it even more suspicious is it looked like it had just been cleaned.
It's like shiny. You can see a reflection in it.
Yeah,
like,
right.
This has clearly not been used.
Yeah. They said there wasn't even a fingerprint on it. Come on. As they removed, there was this little emblem. It's easier if you're looking at the picture, but there's this small coin-sized emblem at the hilt. And they actually removed it. And they discovered what they thought was just an extremely small drop of blood that was potentially left behind. It was about the size of a pinhead, but unfortunately this droplet was just far too small to test without actually destroying it, so they couldn't do much with it, and they couldn't even really confirm if it was blood. So keep that in mind for later. The next day they brought Father Robinson back in for questioning, and the plan was to use the evidence of the letter opener against him to try and get a confession. But before that, they gave him a polygraph test, and after a long series of questions, the results came back inconclusive. As we know, polygraph results, they're inadmissible in court, but, looking through these results, the polygrapher noted that deception was registered during the test when they asked Father Robinson directly about the death of Sister Margaret Ann Pahl.
Well, after the test, detectives Arthur Marks and Lieutenant William Keena questioned him again. But not long into the questioning, Deputy Police Chief Ray Vedder interrupted the interview. In the doorway behind him stood Monsignor Jerome Schmidt and an attorney, Henry Herschel. Monsignor Jerome Schmidt was known as one of the most powerful religious figures in the area. What is a Monsignor?
They're
we need
a
like
priest.
A hierarchy
chart.
chart.
I know. Sometimes I still need it because I can't remember half the time. So yeah, Monsignor is basically, it's not like someone who runs the church. In my church, Shrine Catholic, our Monsignor did run the church, but a Monsignor is more just like a high title that's given. It's like an honor title, essentially.
Okay.
So, and a lot of people, I think it might even not even exist anymore. Like you don't get Monsignor status anymore. I think that was revised at some point, but a lot of the times when you were given that honor title of Monsignor, it was kind of likely that you might go on to become a bishop. So it was, imagine like you're like getting a raise from the church.
Gotcha.
And they're like, hey, you're on track to be promoted, buddy. It's kind of like that. That's what Monsignor title status is.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So when the Monsignor showed up, detectives were suddenly ordered to leave the room. Deputy Chief Ray Vedder, also a staunch Catholic, ordered all police reports in the case to be turned over to his office. And minutes later, Marks and Keena watched as Father Robinson and the other three men walked out of the station in silence. Locals later scrutinized this instance as Monsignor Schmidt covering for one of his own. And as we know now, covering for Catholic priests in the late 20th century was all too common. Allegedly, the Toledo police, especially Deputy Chief Ray Vedder, were in on it too. There was a known but secret policy in local stations that police were never supposed to arrest men of the cloth. That's fucking wild.
Isn't that scary?
Yeah, that's very scary. In the early 2000s, an investigative report on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church showed that Toledo police repeatedly refused to arrest or investigate Catholic priests between 1955 and 2005. So 50 years.
Imagine the potential crimes that were going on in that time too.
That is insane. Police, yeah.
It's mob level.
It really is.
Like
I mean,
corruption.
there's no other way to really describe it.
Yeah.
That's just like, no, don't touch them.
Yeah.
Untouchables.
Yep.
Police neither confirmed nor denied the allegations, of course, but they said they do not currently grant favors to priests anymore. So no special privileges.
It's like almost an admission, though. You're like, well, we don't do
not
it anymore.
now, but for 50 years,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
The next week, Father Robinson took another polygraph test, but this time the polygrapher had been chosen by his lawyer, not biased at all, and he didn't take the test at the police station. Instead, he took it at the headquarters of the Toledo Diocese. Father Robinson passed the test with flying colors.
Of course.
Of course. He's being, like, they hired the guy. They slip him a lunch, like, hey, just make sure it's all truthful,
right.
all the results. Although the tests were later deemed inconclusive because some of his responses indicated emotional stress.
Okay.
So which is it?
Yeah, right.
This just seems like a bunch of bullshit.
Right.
Either way, the investigation into Father Gerald Robinson ended, and with no other suspects, the murder case of Sister Margaret Pahl went cold. Mysteriously, some of the local reports written about the investigation had also somehow disappeared. And Sister Margaret's murder became a small footnote in Toledo's history, which is crazy that not only is this like covering up a murder, but a murder of one of their own.
Yeah. And that's why when you were saying like, oh, they're interested in protecting their own, it's very specific who they're protecting, right? They'd rather protect this priest than the dead sister, which, I mean, you can expand on that as much as you'd want and speculate. Is it because she's a woman? Is it because she's a sister? Is it because they just want to pretend like none of this ever happened? You know, I don't know.
Probably the latter. Probably just want to make this go away.
Yeah.
Period.
Like it never happened. Yeah.
Well, fast forward through nearly 2 decades of silence when in 2003, Toledo police received a damning letter from a woman who called herself, quote unquote, Survivor Doe. She was in her early 40s working as a teacher in a Catholic elementary school when she needed to finally get several tragic secrets off of her chest. She claimed that Father Robinson had sexually abused her when she was a child. She also claimed that satanic cult rituals and human sacrifice were involved. Father Robinson wasn't the only one. She also claimed that she had been sexually, physically, and emotionally abused by a number of other priests throughout her childhood, which is pretty disturbing. I mean, very, very sad. She said the abuse started when she was in preschool. A local priest, Father Chet Warren, would often come to her house to counsel her mother, and when the counseling session ended, Father Warren suggested that her mother go up to the bedroom and get some rest, leaving him alone with Survivor Doe. Out of sight, this was when he would abuse her. The abuse continued through the years, according to her. She also claimed an underground cult would perform satanic rituals, and the cult was made up of 3 Catholic priests, 2 female teachers, a pediatrician, her own father, and her grandfather. Starting at 5 years old, she was sexually assaulted, locked in a box full of cockroaches, and forced to witness the cult murder of a 3-year-old girl in a human sacrifice ritual, which these claims are very bold and very, very disturbing.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that? 3 Catholic priests making up this satanic cult? Like, that's
like it's hard to parse through, especially accusations that are years and years, decades after the fact. But it's at least worth considering, like any of this or all of it, even as crazy as the claims might seem. I think it's worth looking into. At least people she's naming specifically. I mean, that would, if I was the police, I'd be like, oh, at least we should look into the names that are specifically mentioned here.
right.
Even if all these stories aren't true, something might be going on.
Well, especially the fact she names her own father and grandfather.
Right.
Like, that's crazy. Like, why would you, make something up about your own father and grandfather if, there wasn't some truth to it? I mean, that's pretty, that'd be insane. But,
and I mean, I wouldn't put it past the church for somehow covering up some really dark, seedy areas.
Well, I mean, I go back to the inverted cross stab wounds. Like, what is that about?
Right.
Is that connected somehow to this experience that Survivor Doe had? I mean, it could be, because among those priests was Father Gerald Robinson, and she claimed she was forced to sexually interact with Father Robinson when she was 14 years old, but she clarified that there was no ritual during this instance. The abuse continued into high school even, and she would regularly be forced into Father Chet Warren's apartment where she was violently sexually assaulted. Her claims were never substantiated, and I mean, I don't know if we can really elaborate on why that is. It could just be they had no, the police just didn't investigate.
Yeah, or
Men
it's
of the
like
cloth, or,
so much time has passed
Right.
too between when these crimes occurred.
But in the mid-2000s, Father Chet Warren would later be stripped of his priesthood and banned from the church in nearby playgrounds after the Toledo Diocese took the sexual abuse allegations to Toledo Municipal Court. 5 others accused him of sexual abuse, including a fellow nun and a clergy member whose abuse began at the age of 13. The survivor Doe had even gone to Toledo church officials in 1985, but they failed to respond to her pleas and refused to remove Father Warren from the ministry. This survivor Doe was revealed to be Sister Mary Curtis, and despite everything, she'd become a sister for the Catholic Church. And instead of going to the police first with her allegations, she had gone directly to church officials. They, of course, wanted to handle the situation internally. For obvious reasons, this wasn't in her best interest. The church was much more interested in protecting itself. Eventually, an unnamed counselor urged her to go to the authorities instead, which is when she wrote the letter. She later filed a civil lawsuit against Father Robinson seeking financial damages for having been a victim of ritual abuse. The case was later dismissed in 2011, and apparently the case was filed too late due to the statute of limitations in Ohio. The good news was, in 2003, after 23 years since Sister Margaret's murder, Father Robinson was back in the criminal spotlight. Toledo cold case detectives Steve Forrester and Tom Ross began digging into the case again in 2003, which would lead them into a 9-month investigation. Quickly, they rediscovered Father Robinson's letter opener, the miniature cutlass sword with a tiny drop of blood. In the evidence box, they also uncovered the altar cloth that had bloodstains and punctures through the fabric. They went ahead and re-examined the bloodstains on the fabric near the letter opener's drop of blood under the emblem near the hilt. They found lines of blood that traced a similar shape to the emblem and the letter opener's handle, where the raised portion covered in blood would have touched the cloth. Another bloodstain perfectly matched the curve of the letter opener's blade. So, I mean, very smart to take a look at the bloodstains.
Yeah.
Because the hilt of the letter opener is like ribbed. So they were able to see the patterns from where the blood would have come off of it. But let's go ahead and take a look at a little footage here of Detective Terry Cousineau explaining the blood transfer patterns. This is very interesting.
Yeah.
Detective Terry Cousineau is part of the Toledo Police Department's Scientific Investigations Unit. He testified about blood transfer patterns.
Could you describe what a transfer pattern is?
Transfer pattern is a bloodstain pattern that occurs when a bloody object comes in contact with a clean object and leaves blood on the clean object, sometimes showing some of the shape and form of the object that transferred the blood.
The prosecution contends the murder weapon came in contact with an altar cloth that was placed over the sister's body before she was stabbed.
Or this was a definite transfer pattern that had a ribbed design to it. And looking at the letter opener, I noticed that the handle is ribbed and that this transfer pattern has a consistent shape and size with the ribbed handle of the letter opener.
I think that right there is very compelling.
Same. I think that's like a slam dunk piece of evidence right there.
I mean, it's such a unique pattern, and you have the hilt right next to it, and it clearly matches up.
Yeah, those measurements look almost...
The lines are like the exact width.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at a clip of Dr. Henry Lee, which you may have heard of before. He also testified in the O.J. Simpson trial. He was called to testify in this one as well. And he takes the stand to explain the emblem marking found on the altar cloth.
So, Dr. Henry Lee took the stand this afternoon. He's a forensic scientist who gained national attention during the O.J. Simpson trial. He testified today about his work on this murder case, and specifically his study of a medallion that was part of the alleged murder weapon.
I cannot come here to tell you this pattern is produced exactly by this. I only can say similar to.
The defense fired back with questions about Dr. Lee's report on this case and the emotion that may or may not have been involved in the murder.
These wounds are more commonly associated with a frenzied type of killing.
Yes.
Okay.
I do appreciate how accurate they are. I think a lot of people bring up, oh, he's not saying it's an exact match, it's similar. And people are like, oh, that's not really that strong of evidence. I don't know if he's saying it's a similar match. On top of that, we're seeing those blood stains with the handle as well. I think it's pretty convincing. And I know a lot of it, they're very specific. If you watch more of the trial, they're very specific with the language that they use. And they're more like, look, this is similar. And the fact that it doesn't look like this means it can't be that. So they're more interested in just honing in, which I think it's important to note that we're not talking about exact matches here. And I think it's really hard to pick up anything exact from like blood splatters and smears and where people are wiping blades and stuff. That's difficult evidence to just be 100% certain on, you know?
Right. And again, this is the only potential murder weapon they found.
Right.
So obviously the defense is going to be like, well, how do you know for sure that this letter opener was used in the attack?
Yeah. And
we'll get into it more.
Yeah.
There's more evidence. Yeah.
And the defense will try and be like, well, what about the scissors? So yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later. But here is one of the fascinating parts of this murder case. Detectives Forrester and Ross also reached out to an occult expert. His name was Reverend Jeffrey Grob from the Chicago Archdiocese. Detectives knew 9 of Sister Margaret's wounds looked like inverted crosses, and not to mention Sister Mary Curtis's claims of an underground satanic cult possibly performing human sacrifice rituals. So they're like, maybe we should actually look into this element of occult rituals. They pieced together the most plausible murder scenario, including the occult elements, and they theorized that Father Robinson snuck up behind Sister Margaret. While she was distracted with getting the chapel prepared for Easter, he caught her off guard and strangled her. It's important to remember that Sister Margaret also struggled with hearing loss. He then dragged her body into the sacristy, where he covered her with the altar cloth and stabbed her several times with the letter opener. Using a cross, he inverted the shape against her chest, which he used as a guide. He then stabbed the outline of the inverted cross. This is all speculation, but this is like the occult ritual theory here. The occult expert believed the murder was intended to be a ritual sacrifice, and the reason she might have been targeted was because she was completely devoted to her faith and helping those in need. She was like the idyllic form of a sister, and considering, remember, all her career achievements, you know, Sister Margaret was seen as like the pinnacle. She would even wear a wedding ring as a sign she had married herself to God. And so maybe in the eyes of this occult killer, she was the purest target that he could find. It also might not be a coincidence that the murder occurred on Holy Saturday, and this is the day before Easter. And if you know, in Catholicism, Easter is considered the most significant day in the Christian calendar. Some might mistake Christmas, but it's actually Easter, because this marks the resurrection of Christ and the birth of eternal hope. She was also murdered in the main chapel, arguably the most sacred place in that hospital. So in the medical examiner's report, a smudge of blood on Sister Margaret's forehead was also noted, and the theory proposes that the smudge was a sign that the killer had anointed her with her own blood. And if you're familiar with Catholics, this might sound familiar to you, but this is similar to how Catholics are anointed with consecrated oil during their confirmation, also known as chrism. As for her wounds suggesting sexual assault, it was proposed that the killer might have violated Sister Margaret with the cross or crucifix before the killer fled the scene. So, Detectives Forrester and Ross also questioned as many people from the original investigation as they possibly could, and unfortunately many had died by 2003 because this is, 20 plus years after the murder had happened. But one person's statement stood out. It was a statement from Dr. Jack Barron, and he had been working at Mercy Hospital on the day of the murder, which was April 5th, 1980. The emergency call had come in over the intercom telling everyone to go to the chapel, and since he had never been to the hospital chapel, he accidentally took a wrong turn, so he's a bit late to the scene, and by the time he got to the chapel, Sister Margaret was already pronounced dead. On paper, this was the exact same statement he had given back in 1980, but in 2003, when he was questioned, he told detectives Forrester and Ross that something had always bugged him about the case, and he claimed he told the original detectives that when he took that wrong turn on his way to the chapel, he ran into Father Robinson. Apparently, the original detectives shrugged that detail off.
Shrugged it off or covered it up? Actively ignored it.
Yes.
That's a pretty big deal because
Right.
it's like, let's take a look at his timeline a little bit more closely.
Exactly. So as it turned out, Dr. Barron wasn't the only witness who claimed to see Father Robinson that morning. Shocker.
So he's actually out and about
Yeah.
doing whatever he's doing.
Yeah. As detectives Forrester and Ross continued their interviews, 2 others claimed to have spotted Father Robinson near the chapel that morning. Grace Jones was a lab tech at the hospital, and she had started her shift around 4 a.m., super early. At around 7 a.m., she went to grab a newspaper from a lower floor, then headed to the elevator to head back up to her lab. This is when she saw Father Robinson exiting the chapel carrying a duffel bag.
What?
Whoa. Huge.
That's huge, yeah.
As she got back to her lab, the emergency call came over the intercom. So this is
how did they not put 2 and 2 together?
I know. This is placing Father Robinson at the scene before
leaving
the call
the chapel
came in.
with a duffel bag.
Because if you remember, according to his statement to police, he didn't show up to the chapel until much later. He's like, I was getting out of the shower. Someone called me. And then I showed up after she was already dead. It is also important to note, this is 20 some years later. Eyewitness testimony can get a little scrambled, but you'll see there are many, many eyewitnesses to this. Another witness was Leslie Ann Curran, EKG tech. She had started her shift at around 7 a.m. that day. She was confident that at exactly 6:50 a.m. she clocked in. She prepped equipment in her office before entering the hallway where she saw Father Robinson near the chapel doors. A little over an hour later, she heard Sister Madeline screaming and ran out of her office to check on what was happening. Sister Madeline had just discovered the body, if you remember, and Leslie did not tell the original investigators about seeing Father Robinson that morning because she thought, I'm seeing the chaplain near where he's supposed to be, and it was kind of normal. So she didn't really note that when she was first questioned by authorities. So it starts to add up. There are already 3 witnesses deep into placing Father Robinson at the scene here.
Yeah, it's just a shame it took 20 years to get pretty concrete, at least circumstantial evidence that his story doesn't line up with eyewitness testimony.
Right.
And, and kind of start put 2 and 2 together here. So on April 23rd, 2004, detectives visited Father Robinson's home and finally arrested him for the murder of Sister Margaret Ann Pahl. When Detective Ross took him to the station, Detective Forrester stayed to search the priest's house, and he spotted something odd in Father Robinson's bedroom. On the top shelf of his closet, there was a box filled with hundreds of photographs of deceased individuals. Many were dead people in coffins during funerals or wakes, which this is very creepy to me. And I don't know if this is I assume probably not something that priests do.
I've never heard of priests keeping pictures of the dead. Maybe if there's a off chance that a priest might be listening to this episode, is there any possible explanation for this? Because in my opinion, this is just weird.
Well, who took the photographs? And where are those from?
Right. It's a good question.
That's what I'd like to know. Is it Father Robinson taking these photos, or is he getting these photos from somebody else? Does he have a connection down at the morgue or something? This is very, very strange.
Right.
And who are the people in the photographs, and what's their connection to Father Robinson?
Yeah. What was it? Was it like people who they held funerals at the church that he was serving at? I don't know.
But even then, I don't think any funeral home is taking pictures. Let's hope not.
Yeah, right.
I mean, my God, such a violation of the individual who's deceased, but also the families, knowing that there's photos being taken of their loved ones.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. And then to make matters worse, they found a pamphlet titled The Occult on Father Robinson's bookshelf. And supposedly the pamphlet was an official pamphlet distributed by the Catholic Church. But it's very obvious that the pamphlet had been clearly read through and studied, as there was passages underlined. And I wish so bad we could take a look at that
what they
and
actually
know
were.
what was the underlined passages.
Yeah.
So if you're this detective, you're finding this pamphlet about the occult, which I assume talks about satanic worship, devil worship, ritual killing, sacrifice. I mean, I think they're actually pretty, I mean, to even have an occult pamphlet for a church, I think says something, right?
Yeah.
They've looked into it enough and they're aware of it enough that they've created this piece of literature. Like, I don't think if I went to one of the churches I attended, I could go and find a pamphlet on the occult anywhere within the church. Like,
and I'm wondering, were these just handed out to the priest as like, here are maybe some red flag warning signs if one of your parishioners is getting into some
like what is the
something.
content in this?
Yeah.
But there was one particular section that stood out, and this was titled The Black Mass. In satanic circles, a black mass is generally a ceremony that is meant to be blasphemous and sacrilegious to the Catholic Church. In a way, it's a parody of Catholic Mass. Dating all the way back to the 4th century CE, those who claim black masses as heresy also claim the participants were performing rituals of sexual nature. Some even claim that women were passing around their menstrual blood and drinking it. Fast forward to modern day, it's mostly used as a form of protest, which I definitely have seen before. If you look at like the Satanic Temple, they do a lot of protesting, which they bring Baphomet to the Capitol grounds. If you've ever seen that before, it's pretty wild. Despite its long history, there was no set of instructions for performing a black mass until about the 1960s in the United States. Most rituals were drawn from occult novelists and occult nonfiction writers. Still, there is no definite, all-encompassing black mass. But Father Robinson seemed to have an interest in it. What made Detective Forster worried was that in the particular pamphlet, there was an emphasis on human sacrifice. Once Detective Ross got Father Robinson back to the station, he read him his rights before interrogating him. Father Robinson told him the exact same story he told the detectives 2 decades earlier. He had just gotten out of the shower when someone called and told him what had happened, and then he headed to the sacristy. Apparently, the other chaplain, Father Swiatek, accused Father Robinson of murdering Sister Margaret in front of the other sisters, asking, "Why did you do this?" Wow,
we missed that 20 years ago.
In which Father Robinson denied the allegations and said he didn't know what he was talking about. Which, you're being accused of
by the other priest there. Whoa.
Did he know something about Father Robinson? Throughout the interrogation, Detective Ross knows Father Robinson had several inconsistencies with his stories of what happened. And we actually have a little bit of interrogation footage to show you. It's not the best quality or best audio, but I think it's worth listening to.
Daniel Steinbach is a professor at the University of Toledo's College of Law. He teaches criminal procedure investigations, which includes interrogation. We watch part of the tape with him today.
There's something about his demeanor that is just not right when it's clear that you are the suspect in this homicide. Let's see a little passion. Let's see a little, hey, you got the wrong guy here. Or why are you doing this to me?
Father Robinson is asked why a fellow chaplain pointed the finger at him the day of the murder.
He turns around and he confronts you and says, "You did this. What is that all about?" He didn't say you did this. How did he say that? I think he said, "Why? Why? Why?" That's all he said was, "Why?"
He's also grilled about the alleged murder weapon, a letter opener found in his living quarters.
You had to have that knife down there. And you had to have killed Sister with this knife. Father, why are you smirking? I mean, that's mysterious.
I'm not smirking. I don't know how this all this is about. That was not it.
Detective Ross leaves the room a short time later. Father Robinson sits quietly for most of the time, but he does speak briefly. What he says is hard to hear, but we picked up the word sister and oh my Jesus. Steinbach believes the tape was more helpful to the prosecution than the defense, but he says there is a benefit for the defense.
From the defense point of view, they have gotten the jury to hear him and hear his denials without putting him on the stand at trial and having him subject to cross-examination.
I agree with the law professor's sort of analysis there, because he doesn't seem to be very, he's not like trying to be like, he's just like, I don't know what this is all about.
Yeah, there's no protests.
Yeah, it's not like he's not vehemently like denying that he had any involvement in this. He's just kind of like,
if someone's bringing me into an interrogation, well, one, I'm lawyering up, which we often see suspects fail at. But two, yeah, I'd be like, what? This is insane.
Especially if you didn't do it.
Right.
You'd be like, I did not do this. You have the wrong guy.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously, guilty people do that all the time. But,
true.
But it's just his demeanor is definitely very odd. He's like way too chill. And then the detective even says he smirks at one point, which is just gives me the creeps. Like he just kind of like thinks it's a joke or something.
Right.
Like, he's like,
and how he's changing up his story a little bit. So it's like, yeah, the other chaplain accused me of this. Oh, but no, then he was just saying why. I'm like, well,
and that's interesting. Why? Because that's already, I think, kind of telling us that he already knows or strongly believes that he's the killer. And your fellow priest is accusing you of murder, and he's just kind of unfazed by it.
Yeah.
And then the scene of him by himself where he's like, oh, Jesus, sister, and he's just kind of like, maybe it's that moment of like, oh, jig's up,
Yeah. Yep.
They figured this out.
Yep.
So Father Robinson might have been able to get away with it 2 decades earlier, but now with new evidence and several people placing Father Robinson at the scene, it seemed like they had a strong case against him. He clearly wasn't in the shower like he had said. Plus, the witnesses who had arrived at the chapel after the emergency call claimed that Father Robinson never even showed up. Unfortunately, during the interrogation, they weren't able to get a confession out of him. I was just like, dude, if you did it, isn't that like practice what you preach? Why not just confess and just, admit at this point? It's been 20 years that you've potentially gone uncaught.
Yeah.
Why not just confess? And
it's because there are plenty of priests who do not practice what they preach. And that's the key to this whole thing.
Meanwhile, supporters tried to raise money for Father Robinson's bond, which was $200,000 in cash or $400,000 in property. In spring of 2004, Sister Margaret's body was exhumed. A re-examination showed that some of the stab wounds were deep enough to reach her bones. They compared a lower jawbone laceration to the letter opener's blade and found that it was an exact match. A second opinion from a forensic anthropologist also confirmed that it was a perfect match. The prosecution said the blade fit the wounds, quote unquote, like a key in a lock. Not only did this connect Father Robinson's letter opener to the wounds on Margaret, but this was also evidence that wounds that deep aren't often made by strangers. This murder was personal. There was passion behind this murder because, again, she was stabbed 31 times. And I think that's like almost like a proven statistic at this point. When this type of killing happens and this many stabbings, there's some rage behind it. It's likely personal.
Yeah.
And seeing that this case was also bigger than Father Robinson himself, Detectives Forrester and Ross got a warrant to search the Catholic Toledo Diocese archives, which had been accused of keeping secret archives. According to the diocese, these alleged secret archives didn't exist, but they did keep confidential files under church law for internal matters.
Whatever the hell that means.
Yeah, what does that mean exactly? Like
internal matters. Yeah, you mean when your priests are committing crimes and you need to cover it up.
Right.
And then you're just going to destroy whatever is there.
And we know the Vatican has secret archives.
Yeah.
So, and they keep everything, it sounds like. So, where is this information? Detectives were looking for more information on Father Robinson in this potential cover-up, and at first, the church seemed to cooperate and gave the detectives 148 pages of documents on Father Robinson dating all the way back to 1980. But as they searched through them, there was no mention of Sister Margaret's murder or either of the investigations into him. Which that's crazy. This is one of their own, and they don't even care enough to keep any sort of documentation on a murdered sister.
Or there once was documentation that is now unavailable.
Unavailable.
Yeah.
Destroyed or hidden somewhere.
Yeah.
So they ended up searching another office in the diocese, but found nothing. So where'd it go? They had 20 years, I guess, to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah. Also, I've never really thought about this because often when we see warrants, it's like you're going through someone's residential home and you can basically flip over all the furniture, tear open all the walls. Like it's a very, I mean, unless we're talking about like a massive mansion, but for the most part, you know, you can go into a house, rip it to shreds, open everything up and search the whole house. But like getting a warrant on an archdiocese, where do you even begin? Like, who knows how many rooms is in where and like how many documents they have printed on a million different things. How could you even conceive of going through thousands and thousands of documents trying to look for something so specific? So that's why it's like the church is like, okay, you have a warrant. Here, we'll just hand over what we have, quote unquote.
Save you the time and effort.
Yeah. Rather than going through all our archives because it'll take you years. Here's what we got. So you just kind of have to trust them on it. Like, I don't know. I never really considered.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I can imagine there'd be a lot to search there.
Yeah. Endless. And if
there's 140 some pages on him alone,
right?
Imagine how many on everybody else.
All the other priests in the archdiocese. Yeah. So what do you just have to get a bunch of interns to try and rifle through?
Right.
Like how deep does this go? How much do you want to put all these resources into searching that, you know?
Sounds like it needs a full deep dive.
Yeah, seriously.
Because who knows what else we'll uncover.
Yeah. So in December 2005, the charges against Father Robinson were actually dropped from aggravated murder to murder, since the prosecution determined that the killing was not premeditated. Even still, they had more than enough evidence to take Father Robinson to trial. It began on April 21st, 2006, when Father Robinson was 68 years old. Prosecution presented all the physical evidence first, the wounds perfect matched the murder weapon and the altar cloth blood marks that matched the murder weapon. Hospital administration and staff, along with the original detectives on the case, all took the stand. It was also revealed that Father Robinson and Sister Margaret did not often get along.
Oh, so now we have motive.
There you go. Father Robinson once described her as having a, quote, dominant personality, and things might have reached a breaking point between them.
She's like, you're a shitty priest.
Yeah.
Calling him out on his bullshit.
Exactly. That's right, because a retired Mercy Hospital housekeeper testified that Sister Margaret was so upset over the way that Father Robinson celebrated Good Friday Mass on April 4th, 1980, if you remember that's one day before her murder, that she later clutched the housekeeper's hands and said, quote, "Why do they cheat God from what belongs to him?" Pretty fired up accusation to be like, he performed that Mass so terribly, he is cheating God. So clearly they did not get along. They also called forward Reverend Jeffrey Grobb, who, if you remember, that's the expert on the occult, and he touched on the ritualistic aspects of the murder. The prosecution did not want to lean into the occult elements of the case as evidence because they feared they would lose some credibility with the jury, which I get. You know, how not only do you have to prove a murder beyond a reasonable doubt, are we going to add this occult element that we now also have to prove? So I get why they kind of reeled back on it. It doesn't mean that
it wasn't involved.
Right. Yeah. It's just that they didn't really want to lean into it during the trial. But they did want Reverend Grobb to give his testimony and lightly touch on the sacrilegious nature of the murder. He said the killer intended to mock and violate Sister Margaret, who was, quote, wedded to Christ, as well as create an affront to the Roman Catholic Church and God, which, you know, even outside of the occult world, that was pretty obvious in this case. He said that the details of the case might not indicate a ritualistic murder, but represented, quote, a reversal of things sacred. These aren't random acts.
I think that's a great way to summarize it.
Right, yeah.
I think it's difficult to say this is a ritualistic murder definitively, but clearly the things done were
An affront to
sacrilegious.
God,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly.
With, reeling back, who was the victim, how it was performed, where it was performed, considering all those things. I think that becomes pretty obvious. And then to form a timeline, the hospital eyewitnesses were brought forward. And on top of the eyewitnesses, Father Robinson was the only person who lived on the floor where Sister Margaret was murdered. And he also lied to the police about not having a key to the sacristy. The defense then argued that, hey, even though Father Robinson did have a key, so did hospital security, maintenance, and many of the other sisters. 31 witnesses were called to the stand throughout the course of the trial. That's quite a lot of witnesses. Father Robinson's defense claimed that most of the evidence was circumstantial and that eyewitness testimony from 2 decades ago was unreliable.
All 31?
All 31? That's
Yeah.
why, see,
There's
even
not a shred of truth in there?
I'm very skeptical on eyewitness testimony, but when you're stacking up this many people and this much circumstantial evidence, like, I don't know, where are you at?
Feels like it gives it a bit more credibility.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, 20 years, I mean, it's very plausible that people's memories
Misremember things.
you're going to misremember stuff. But I think the sheer amount of witnesses, and then I think adding in the circumstantial evidence, and then for me, the most telling piece of evidence in this case is the letter opener.
The blood.
And it's literally found in his quarters.
Right. Yeah.
He's on the same floor that she was murdered on.
Yep.
He could have easily gotten from one point to the other point in a short amount of time. And then I go back to the shower thing. He clearly got in the shower. For what purpose, right? Was it because he just committed a heinous murder and he's all bloody and he was trying, he knew he had to get rid of the blood evidence and clean his knife?
Clean his knife. Exactly. They found it spotless.
So
right?
I think he's trying to kind of give enough of the truth to make it seem plausible, but I think the eyewitnesses just poke holes in everywhere. So it ultimately comes down to, who do you believe more? Do you believe Father Gerald Robinson and what he says happened? And then if it's not him, then who? And where's the evidence? Is there any other circumstantial evidence that points in any other direction to anybody else? And I don't think there is in this case. Because again, the murder weapon, which we don't know for sure is the murder weapon, but based on blood spatter analysis and amongst other things,
too,
the bones, the puncture wounds, it seems pretty certain that is the murder weapon. So why on earth, how did it get in your quarters then?
Right.
If you didn't do it, why is it sitting clean in your quarters?
Yeah.
Is there another one out there possibly? Maybe. But it's a unique one from a specific
Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Right. So I think it was a good move to bring in absolutely everybody, because the jury is going to be like thinking these same things, right? They're like, wow, there's 31 people and maybe their testimony isn't spot on with every little detail, but there's enough here that it's hard to ignore it.
Yeah. And when I went to jury duty, the topic of eyewitness testimony and unreliable testimony, eyewitness testimony came up. And the judge was great about answering questions where he was like, well, you don't isolate eyewitness testimony. It doesn't just act in and of itself as eyewitness testimony. It's connected to all the other evidence presented in a grand scope of things. That is to convince a jury. All the cases that are where people have been convicted on like one person's eyewitness testimony, which are like really horrific cases where that has been true and they were later found innocent, and a lot of those people were like executed and it was already too late. There are cases out there where unfortunately the jury did just isolate one person's eyewitness testimony. But like in this case, that's not what's going on here. Yeah, it might be 2 decades later, but in the grand scope of everything connected, I think the eyewitness testimony is pretty powerful, especially when it's coming from so many.
Well, and they're testifying on things that are fairly easy to remember too.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, obviously you're not going to remember like maybe what you ate for breakfast that morning, and exactly what time you left your quarters and, like specific little details. But as far as like, yeah, I remember seeing him on this very, very traumatic day when one of our sisters was murdered.
Right.
Like, that's going to stick with you.
Yeah.
You know, especially the sisters that then found Margaret's body. And I think those things are not going to be easily forgotten. So
for sure.
Yeah, I think they have the volume here
Yeah.
to withstand any hole poking that the defense try to make. But
definitely. Now there's the question of DNA evidence, because if you think 1980, well, we weren't really using DNA evidence back then. So if he was tried back then, it's a bit different now. The defense brought forward evidence of DNA that did not belong to Father Robinson. This is an interesting part of the case because it had been discovered on Sister Margaret's underwear and apparently under her fingernails. There was evidence of DNA, and it did not belong to Father Robinson. His DNA was also not discovered on the altar cloth. So something to consider here. They also presented marks on the altar cloth that suggested the murder weapon could have been a pair of scissors. There's a picture of this if you're curious. You can go check it out if you're listening. And apparently a pair of scissors used for cutting candle wicks had been reported missing from the chapel. They hoped this would raise enough doubts in the jury. The defense also brought forward another famous person in this case. Her name is Dr. Kathy Reichs, a forensic anthropologist, and you might know her because she's famous for inspiring the TV show Bones. She is actually what that whole show is based on. She took the stand claiming that the photographs of the blade and bone wound matches she examined looked like the bone was not properly cleaned. This would mean that the, quote, perfect match the prosecution proposed might have been inaccurate. She also claimed that inserting the blade into the bone might have compromised the evidence. The prosecution defended themselves, saying that, hey, Dr. Reichs had only examined photos. She didn't even get to examine the real thing, so she might not.
Which I think is a big deal.
That's huge.
Just looking at photos, and this happens a lot in cases where defense will bring in
a famous person,
experts and try to like woo-woo the jury, but they're basing all of their testimony on reviewing case files and photos
after like a few hours or something of work. Right. Yeah. It's not the real thing. So on top of that, this was the very first time she had ever testified based on photos exclusively. So normally she didn't even do this. The medical examiner and forensic anthropologist who had actually examined the bones claimed that they did, in fact, clean the bones before the blade fit test. This, along with all the other evidence, seemed to be enough for the jury.
Which clearly they brought her in to cast doubt.
100%.
Like, well, maybe they didn't clean it.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, we clean it. Like, we're not idiots. We know how to do this.
And then they're like, well, if they put it in there, they might have damaged it. It's like, okay, well, what, are we just completely unprofessional in this then?
Yeah. Well, at the end of his trial on May 11th, 2006, after a short deliberation, the jury found Gerald Robinson guilty of murder. He was given a sentence of 15 years to life in prison, meaning he would most likely die in prison because he's an elderly man at this point.
Yeah.
While incarcerated, he continued to claim that he was innocent, and he immediately began the appeals process. His appeal was denied in July 2008, and in December of that year, the Ohio Supreme Court declined another appeal. In 2009, his defense discovered that over 100 pages of police reports had been misfiled and weren't available to them. Apparently, eyewitnesses had seen another man near the chapel at the time of the murder. Then they tried to pin the murder on the convicted serial killer, Coral Eugene Watts, who died in prison 2 years prior. He had been suspected of nearly 80 murders during his life, and he had killed his victims in a way that was similar to Sister Margaret's murder. A DNA test failed to provide proof for that claim, plus a judge confirmed that Father Robinson's defense attorneys had been aware of the potential connection to Watts during the original trial, and they never pursued that lead, which seems a bit desperate at that point. They're trying to see if they can sneak that back in.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, the DNA discovered under Sister Margaret's fingernails did not belong to Watts or Father Robinson either. His defense then claimed Father Jerome Swiatecki, a deceased Toledo priest who served as the other chaplain at the hospital, might have been the true killer.
Isn't that crazy? Because if you remember, that was the father who, in the interrogation, he was accusing him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, tracking back a little bit, what do you think of those 100 pages that the police misfiled?
Yeah, it's definitely suspicious. I mean,
I could write it off. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that. It seems a bit shifty, but I could write it off as like, look, this was a 2 decades old case. Things have been shifted around over the years.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe.
Is it possible they worked together on this?
For sure.
That maybe there was he was an accomplice to this murder, possibly, because I'd love to know his relationship with Margaret as well.
True.
Or was this him completely pinning this on Father Robinson, and did he take that from his quarters and use the
and frame him?
Possible.
Totally possible.
Because the DNA on the DNA that's unknown is very interesting.
And maybe, during those interrogations,
but why wouldn't Father Robinson say that if he wasn't involved, is my thing.
But maybe it's that internal, like, I have to protect my own. Priests don't go to prison. Like, nothing happened here. Maybe he had that in the back of his mind. Just a theory.
And where was he that day? And where was he seen too?
True. He did show up after. We do have him there, at least to Father Robinson's interrogation video. He put him there afterwards. But where was he beforehand?
The time frame in which all this happened too, I'm kind of feeling like maybe he was involved in some way in whether it was the stabbing itself or
the
cover up of it.
Yeah.
And they like orchestrated a plan together to get rid of her, and they were trying to pin it on somebody just random, but it's I don't know, it just doesn't seem very well thought out to me.
Yeah.
Unless he was literally trying to frame Father Robinson. In which, if he was being framed by him and Father Robinson wasn't involved in it, why on earth would he then continue to protect this other priest?
Right.
You know what I mean? Why would he let himself go down for that?
It also seems convenient that they're accusing him, like, oh, hey, it could have been him. Also, he's dead now. So it might be a strategy to like, oh yeah, that priest who we can't take to trial any longer and who can't even defend himself. It was him. Seems kind of convenient to accuse him then.
But let's take a look at some news footage of Father Robinson's defense lawyer and the prosecuting attorney during these hearings.
Sister Margaret Ann Pahl in the sacristy of Mercy Hospital back in 1980.
If you'll read the evidence that I've attached to the petition back in January, it's about 400 pages worth of probative evidence. And it goes to establish a completely different time of death, a completely different murder weapon, and a different manner of strangulation, all of which points toward the crime being committed by Father Spitecki and not Father Robinson.
The defense says that includes 70 police reports, which were allegedly not found until after Robinson's 2006 trial, along with other evidence and witnesses that never appeared in court in the original trial.
Why didn't they introduce this evidence? They had it in their files. Is there any explanation for that?
Because the law doesn't provide for that, and we're required to follow the law.
The prosecutor says as far as he's concerned, there's no way the case will go any further.
Most of the matters that they raised, they're just asking for a chance to retry the case because the first go-around didn't go their way, and these lawyers now say, you know what, we have a different theory we would have liked to run by the jury since the first one didn't work.
I'm with the prosecutor there. They're like, look, they just wish they had another shot and maybe they didn't handle something well, or maybe they're grasping at straws.
Well, why on earth didn't they go this route the first time?
Right.
Like, that seems like the most obvious defense right there is to blame the other priest.
Right.
And be like, he framed me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, why now?
Why now?
After he's in prison.
And now the other guy's already dead. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, those DNA tests had also cleared Father Jerome Switecki, which is important.
So there you go.
So, and like, could it be, I'd like to know more about that DNA, like how much DNA is there, and can they get a complete profile? Do they have a complete profile and it just doesn't match up with Father Robinson's, or is it not a complete profile and therefore it's just impossible to know?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or did Father Robinson perhaps have somebody else come in and do the murder? itself. Maybe he didn't actually commit the murder, but he arranged for somebody else to come in and do it. And he took the fall for it ultimately, but is that a possibility as well?
For sure.
Because I think the question is Father Robinson capable of doing a heinous murder like this?
And I think he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. So yeah, I don't know. I'd want to know more details around the DNA and how much DNA is there. Because obviously there's DNA under the fingernails. That could mean she's defensive in her last moments, trying to fight off her attacker potentially, or scratch him or something like that. It's interesting that there is DNA under the fingernails. That doesn't seem like there was any injuries of note to Father Robinson as well. And I think the other thing that does raise some questions as well is these are very, very deep wounds. And again, looking at the letter opener, the hilt does have because it's in the shape of a cutlass sword, it does have the, on the handle, there's no way for the hand to slip down the blade and cut, that's like something that gets brought up with stabbings is that, when
they usually injure themselves,
they end up cutting themselves, and there's clear wounds that, connect them to the stabbing. But with this particular blade and the hilt, that wouldn't necessarily happen.
Right.
And again, he said he went and took a shower too. So if there was evidence on him, he washed it off. But it is interesting, how he was on the same floor, I guess, of the chapel in the quarter. So it'd probably been pretty easy for him to get back to his place in no time.
Yeah. And police didn't pick him up for what? It was like 2 weeks or something after the murder had even occurred. So I don't know, even if he did injure himself, that wound could have healed.
Right. And I would imagine, the police talked to everybody in this hospital pretty much. And you would think they would have, unless, again, they're the world's worst cops and just did a horrific job investigating this, that they wouldn't have found more circumstantial evidence, at least putting Father Jerome at the scene as well and being involved. You know what I mean? There would have had to been a little bit of something else there, I feel, to connect him to this.
Yeah.
And there just wasn't. So again, I think it's very convenient to then try to be like, well, now our theory is he did this and framed our client. So I don't know. There's definitely still a lot of questions.
There's some doubt there for sure.
Yeah. In February 2013, a request for post-conviction relief was denied. Another appeal followed, but in May 2014, Gerald Robinson suffered a major heart attack while incarcerated. He was taken to the prison hospital where he was stabilized, and again, he requested to be released, thinking the system would have mercy on a dying man. And there was a lot of controversy around this, and we have some news footage we want to show you.
Toledo attorney Rick Kerger is representing Gerald Robinson, the Catholic priest convicted in 2006 of the 1980 murder of a nun. In a motion filed in federal court on Friday, Kerger said that the Little Sisters of the Poor Hospice in Oregon has indicated a willingness to receive Robinson into their facility in his final days. Kerger was forced to go to the federal court because Governor John Kasich rejected an early release request.
The statute prohibits anybody who's convicted of murder from being given a compassionate release.
Valerie Bostic lives a few blocks away from where the 1980 murder took place.
Maybe this is where he wants to say his piece for his crime that he committed.
Robinson had a massive coronary in early June. He has been in a prison hospice in Columbus since. In his federal court petition, Kerger said he was seeking an act of grace for a dying man. I spoke to another Toledoan who doesn't have a problem with Robinson spending his final days in Toledo.
If he's already been to prison, and he's thought about it, and he's knowing he's not going to live long enough, I suggest that they just let him live his life in Toledo.
Kerger's filing in federal court indicated that relatives of Robinson are also willing to take care of him. Hubert Wiggins, NBC 24 News.
What do you have to say about this? Let's say he did it, right? And he has been convicted of it, without a shadow of a doubt. Do you think that a dying man should be given some mercy in their final days after a heart attack to just go in a hospice and pass away, like surrounded by family? And
This is my take on these types of requests. I think the only people who should be able to grant a request like this is the victim's family, because they were not afforded any of this.
100%.
So I think if the victim's family feels that he's done his time and that, we feel that comfortable with this request, I think it should be up to them.
I agree.
Because I think this guy is, this was an evil act by an evil man, and whether or not, you're dying or not, like, this is a choice that you made. And as long as you're here on earth, you got to live with those consequences, like there's nothing that can bring Sister Margaret back. There's nothing that can alleviate the pain of her family. So why should your family get to then alleviate your pain?
Right.
You know what I mean?
I agree. And the only reason that this is really coming up is because he was a priest.
Right.
Like no one else is getting the news footage of this. It's because he was a priest.
Poor father.
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
Yeah, nobody else, you don't hear about this very often at all.
Yeah.
Imagine if they did just do that,
Right.
There's probably a lot of other more deserving people than Father Robinson. So
And I like how the guy they interviewed was very straightforward. It's like law prohibits convicted murderers of getting compassionate release. That's what we made. We made a law about it.
Even the governor was like, "No,
yeah."
And I believe John Kasich is a Catholic as well. So, yeah. So, like,
Even that guy,
one of his own, parishioners is like, "Nah."
There you go.
He needs to, and in the belief system, he's the one who's got to stand before God and, face what he did. And so I don't see any reason why he needs to be, in a comfy situation to do that.
Yeah. Because if you're going to heaven, you'll be all right.
Right. Exactly. What does it matter at this point, And it's again, just to make him feel better and make his family feel better. But I defer that,
to the victim's family.
Yeah. I think that's where, if they feel like he should be granted that, then by all means do it. But if not, because the last thing I would hate to see is for the victim's family to be outraged that, their loved one's killer now gets to live out his final days in peace and harmony with his family, and their loved one died a horrible, tragic death, murdered. And I don't know. That doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So obviously his request was denied. Yep. No, sir. And he ended up dying on July 4th, 2014 in Columbus Prison Hospice. But the controversy wasn't over yet. Many argued that Father Robinson should not be given full priestly funeral rights. Although he retired from church duties in 2004, he was still technically an ordained priest. Ultimately, the Catholic Church allowed the funeral despite massive public outcry. One of the biggest voices of opposition came from the members of SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. This organization was started back in 1989 as a support system for survivors of clergy sexual abuse, especially from those in the Catholic Church. As of 2012, it had 12,000 members in 56 countries, and some estimates claim there are upwards of 100,000 survivors of sexual abuse by Catholic priests, which is hard to stomach.
Yeah.
The SNAP organization said, quote, "It's tragic for virtually everyone involved that the Catholic hierarchy is callously letting a convicted murderer go to his grave as a priest in good standing."
Agreed.
More than 200 people attended Father Robinson's funeral. The father who said the homily was quoted as saying, "We're not here to accuse or excuse, but to offer the prayers to Father Robinson's family and the Sisters of Mercy." Yeah, and this is pretty controversial. A lot of people were very unhappy with this. Obviously, the members of SNAP, and want to show you a little footage so you could hear from them.
It's the latest chapter in the saga of Father Gerald Robinson. A recent decision by the Diocese of Toledo to bury Robinson with the full priestly rites has some crying foul.
This man committed a murder, and there's been other allegations against him. Why would you have a display of this is a priest in good standing?
Barbara Doris is the outreach director at SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. She says giving Robinson a burial with full priestly honors would be a slap in the face to the family of Sister Margaret Ann Pahl. The nun, Robinson, was found guilty of murdering in 1980.
There's no need for a public display. There's no need to say you have to bury him with full priestly honors. He wasn't a good priest. He was a priest who committed a murder.
In a statement directed at Toledo Diocese Administrator Father Charles Ritter, Dorr says, quote, "It's a clear choice for Father Ritter and his clerical colleagues. Side with one guilty priest or with many innocent victims. Show compassion for one deceased adult who did wrong or for many living adults who are blameless."
Whether or not he did what they say he did, that's debatable. But through it all, he was still a man of service.
But not everyone is against Robinson.
There's still a man of service.
A longtime friend and pupil of Father Robinson says he believes in the priest's innocence, and given enough time, he thinks Robinson's verdict could have been overturned.
The people's lives he touched in the Diocese of Toledo are countless. He deserves that priestly burial.
While Zaleski says he's glad Father Robinson is getting his final priestly rites, his heart goes out to the family of Sister Margaret Ann Pahl.
In God's eyes, he loved them both.
That guy gives me the creeps.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some skeletons in his closet.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't get this at all. I'm like, he was convicted of these crimes.
Convicted.
There was enough evidence for a jury to convict him. And I think that's all there is to say about it.
What else can we say?
And he definitely didn't do a good job trying to say it was somebody else.
No,
he doesn't he seems to be sitting there not just kind of like, oh well, I guess I did this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if he was truly an innocent man, why not fight for your life more? And you just don't see any of that. And so therefore, I think myself, along with everybody else who was outraged with this, I think he committed the crimes, and I think it's a disgrace to every other good priest out there who was buried with priestly honors to have this monster getting the same treatment, right? Doesn't that just discount all the good people?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like the fundamental problem with the Catholic Church. This is why I left. It's this type of organizational mob mentality shit where you could so easily just own up to this and be like, this guy was rotten and he is no longer one of us. We are stripping his ordained minister cloths. He is no longer a man of the cloth. He's done. We're through with him. We're rejecting all good memory of him. He's no longer one of us. You could so easily do that. This is a convicted murderer. And they still struggle with like, well, technically he's a priest. And he was a good man. Yeah. And like, it's like, does that matter at the end of the day? And was the same attitude that they've had towards the sexual abuse scandals. It's like, well, no. Like, but look what good they've done for our community. And so that's why they shift them around all the other parishes and they cover it all up. Cause it's like, well, he's still a priest, and it's like a whoop, and that's the best they have. That's the best they can do. Rather than try and figure out and weed out the problems, they just want to keep ignoring them.
Yeah, well, I think it's like to admit, guilt puts the spotlight on them even more.
Yeah,
and I think they are worried about what else is going to be found. You know what I mean? And like, if they are just like, yeah, disown him, everybody's like, there's a lot of people being disowned. Like, what's going on here? And I think it's kind of this, they're trying, it's kind of the same way that, sometimes police will, protect bad cops, right?
Right.
It's kind of that brotherhood. It's kind of that,
But doesn't that backfire though?
It does.
Hasn't it
absolutely
backfired?
does.
Like, does the Catholic Church have a good reputation in the public eye? No. Like this is what they're known for now. So it's like maybe immediately they think like, oh, maybe we can just cover this up and it'll all go away and it'll be fine. We'll protect our image. We won't admit that these things would happen. So we'll just move on. But no, it just makes the problem infinitely worse. And it makes if you're worried about your reputation, it's making your reputation infinitely worse. That goes for the Catholic Church or, the rotten eggs in the police department.
I
will
think
always backfire.
Totally. And I think this just proves how flawed we are as humans.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Here's people who are, the faith is the most important thing to them. And never once they don't stop to think about, like, what would God do? What would Jesus do? These people what would these saints do? What would these people that we idolize and pray to? What would they say if they were here right now?
Right. 200 people showed up for Father Robinson's funeral, a convicted murderer. And a lot of those were staunch Catholic parishioners. I got a little heated on this episode because I think it hits a little close to home. But yeah, this is why it's despicable. This is why I think there's a lot of great things about the Catholic faith. But at the end of the day, this is why it's unsustainable. This is why the Catholic Church is dying. Like no one wants to go back to church anymore. And you wonder why. It's like, is it just because we're kind of fed up with this concept of God? Or is it more that we're seeing these organizational issues that are so disgusting? Like the most reprehensible shit you can imagine is being covered up by, ironically, what's supposed to be uplifting and godlike, I don't know.
Well, it feels like the church has gotten away from God
pretty far.
And it's more about who's in the church, and who runs the church and the powers that they're afforded. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not feels like I like to call it's organized religion, right? I think that's people are sick of organized religion. Like it's not the religion itself. It's not the spiritual beliefs. It's the organizers.
Yeah.
It's the people running these things.
It's the hierarchy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the hierarchy. And this stretches across multiple faiths, right? And I think people are tired of being lied to. We're tired of horrible shit being covered up. And, it's just like, who do you trust anymore? Can we trust any of these people? Can we trust our pastors or priests? Are they really who they say they are?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's created this doubt in our minds. And I think a lot of us are like, this is a major turnoff. why do I need to follow what this person says when they could be an utter piece of shit for all I know? They could be the devil in disguise. And, we see it time and time again, these people in these high up positions of power. And I think it goes back to being flawed humans. And I think a lot of these people are corrupted, whether it's by the forces of evil or if it's just human nature.
There's bad people.
There's bad people who make bad choices and they're not actually committed to these things. And not to say that everybody's like that. There's obviously good people out there that are committed to the faith and committed to.
The problem is that they're not trying to weed that out.
Exactly.
Which is why I think it's actually attracted those types of people into that organization. And that is
there's
problem. Protection
afforded there.
Yeah.
Rather than we will cast you out so fast if you try to do anything.
Right. Yeah.
Because we are trying to practice what we preach and help people find God. And it's just time and time again, it just ends up not being the case.
Yeah. And I'm not asking anyone to reconcile their faith based off things like this. I will ask you how can you reconcile being a member of this organization, knowing the horrible things that have happened? I think it's worth actually, just considering that you are a part of this, which is what I went through. I was like, I am actively a part of this. When I'm participating in Mass and this organization, this is an extension of that. This is all a part of the foundation of it. And these are the priests. These are the men of the cloth that we, are taught to respect in Catholic school from a very young age. They're not seen as above us, but they're seen as they're holy,
definitely
right?
like a role model, right?
Yeah.
They took their faith to the next level.
Right, exactly.
Like they committed themselves to this mission.
And I think that's noble. But then when you see how it's systemically an issue with those specific people, it just, everything kind of falls apart. At least it did for me. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I could not reconcile being a part of the organization any longer.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, that's where I was too. It's not that I was against the beliefs necessarily or the spiritual aspects of it. I think it's the organization. It's seeing the hypocrisy within the organization, within its own leaders, that you're like, whoa, why am I why am I putting myself through this? Why am I trying to commit myself to this organization's mission when the mission's being run by
corrupt?
It's very corrupt, and since then, I've started believing that I don't need the organization to feel a connection with God or our Creator or the divine. I don't feel that, and that's just my personal beliefs. But I think more and more people are starting to realize that of like, why do I need a priest? Why do I need a pastor? Why do I need these people to lead me or, teach me? And, how do I know that they are practicing what they preach? How do I know they're not hypocrites behind the scenes? And I think it's demoralizing when over and over and over again, you see these people are not who they portray themselves to be on Sundays and not, and then you find out the organization that they work for is even worse, like it's got this mob-like mentality in a lot of ways. I think there's this, and I think it's systemic, and it's so out of control and so goes back so far that can it even be corrected at this point without completely starting over?
Yeah, you'd have to overhaul a ton. And I know a lot of people are attracted to it because the communion aspect of it, not like the Eucharist communion, but like the actual communion of people.
Yeah.
The
community aspect.
Yeah. Is like a big part of it, which I think could be extremely beneficial. And growing up in that, I think was extremely beneficial, but it's like at what cost?
Right. Well, and isn't it the rituals too?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Catholic Church is very ritualistic in nature.
Yeah. And especially like the gathering of people, that's a lot of what it's about. Yeah. And I don't know. It's just like, I couldn't reconcile it any longer. I couldn't just keep ignoring the atrocities. Let's just call it what it is. Across the planet. This wasn't even just exclusive to the U.S. This is all across the planet.
I mean, the SNAP organization is talking about potentially 100,000 victims across 56 countries.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Catholic Church is everywhere. So, and to know that there's not, it's not just like isolated to the U.S., that these types of atrocities are happening across the world. I mean, you got to look at the root.
Yeah.
Where's the root there?
Yeah.
I mean, I go back to Father Amort.
Hell yeah. That was a great episode.
Yeah. Father Amort, man. His quote about the devil is in the Vatican. And I was like, damn.
Amen.
It's like, wow.
He's there.
Yeah. He's there. He's literally there. According to Father Amort. Like, that's crazy. I mean, here's a guy who spent his whole life doing exorcisms and, dealing with, obviously not everybody thinks demonic possession's real, but dealing with people who he believed was possessed by evil.
Mm-hmm.
And he clearly, was in and out of the Vatican and knew a lot of high-ranking members within the Vatican. To say something like that is pretty eye-opening to me.
And I think that quote came from, he was referencing the sexual abuse.
Yes.
When he said
correct.
devil is in the Vatican.
Right.
That's what he was talking about. It's right there. So and that's how we still know, there's good priests out there. We're not trying to just
there's great spiritual leaders everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it's the organizational cover up of crimes and controversies and scandals. And when you are in this position of power and influence over your flock, your parishioners, and it turns out you're not the person you say you are, and you're committing crimes, heinous crimes. That's it. That's where it ends. Like you can no longer be a part of this anymore. You know what I mean? And at least in a position of power or influence, right? Like, it's not to say you can never be a part of the faith again, but you can't lead people after that.
Yeah.
And that's what bothers me, is that they cover it up and then they continue to lead and continue to be in these positions of power where it enables them to potentially have more victims.
Yeah.
And just the systemic cycle continues. And then it creates essentially more victims, because other priests who decide to go that way see, oh, look at what this guy did.
Yeah, I can get away with it.
and there's this protection here.
Yep. And I know you're sick of hearing about movies, but there is a great movie called Doubt with Philip Seymour Hoffman. That's about how people struggle. They have this cognitive dissonance, even with people within the faith, when it comes to predators, for the exact reasons that we mentioned. Like, oh, they're so beneficial to this community that maybe we can just look past this problem, or maybe I'll just put on my blinders and pretend like this doesn't even exist. And I think a lot of people go about their day doing that with these types of people.
Yeah. I mean, just go back to the fact that his Father Robinson's files.
Yeah.
You know, where's all the transparency there?
Right.
You know, where are they? Are they destroyed? And what if people found out that they literally destroyed evidence?
Right.
Covering up these crimes. I mean, it's crazy. And because of that, we don't even know the full extent of Father Robinson's crimes.
Right.
Or his involvement in even past incidents. I mean, if he was capable of committing a murder like this, what else did he do throughout his decades of service? I mean, who knows? And not only protecting a murderer, but somebody who's potentially connected to who's the exact opposite of who he says he is. You know, he could, for all we know, he's this, occultist priest who's dabbling in, devil worshiping
and human sacrifice.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, holy shit. They're going to protect this guy? Like, it's just unbelievable.
Also, if we go with that occult route, that's also ironic as well that they're handing out these pamphlets to be like, what to look out for. And it's one of their own. It's like, yeah, it's the guy right there. It's the guy you handed the pamphlet to look out for the satanic rituals. He's right here.
Yeah. He could have wrote it for all we know.
Yeah.
You know
seriously.
what I mean? He authored it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's disturbing, man. It really is. And then not to mention that Sister Margaret, who just seemed like the sweetest person, truly in it for the right reasons, based on all accounts and, her actions, completely gets, no protection or even recognition, for that matter, from the very church she served. It's just crazy. And the fact that this is literally one of their own, and they're still got to protect the priest. It's crazy.
Always.
Well, despite the tragedy and its obvious controversies, many have remembered Sister Margaret Ann Pahl as the woman she was, loving, determined, and of course selfless. A fellow sister named Mary said, quote, "She was wonderful. Above all, Sister Margaret was completely devoted to God, and she believed that her killer would have to answer to a much higher power than earthly courts." Which I believe that to be true as well.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, right? So, yeah, there you have it. Father Gerald Robinson. I think there's definitely some doubts, some questions still there.
Certainly.
And I don't, obviously the church made it difficult to investigate this properly.
Yeah.
And thoroughly from the beginning.
Imagine how different the case might have gone if they were able to try him in the 1980s instead of 2 decades later.
Yeah.
What else they could have potentially found.
Yeah. Because, I think it'd be interesting to dig in more to, going back to Survivor Doe, who ended up being one of the other sisters, and her claims and the abuse that she underwent. And she claims ritual abuse is there, and that Father Robinson was a part of this satanic cult, which is like just scary to think about. That these guys are,
it could be, the exact opposite of what they're
literally
what they are on paper. Yeah.
So, and like, I think a lot of us are like, well, they would have investigated that, right? They would have looked into these claims. They would have found evidence of this. And therefore, can we substantiate these claims? I don't know that we ever can, because I don't know how deep they actually looked into these things and what was the knowledge that they had to do it with. And so I think it's possibility. I mean, I think if that were, I feel like if that was more rampant, that there would be more evidence gathered. But is it possible it's just all covered up and all, maybe that goes so deep that they hide it very well.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to believe that, but I don't think it's impossible that something like that could be going on. So
if they're willing to cover up murder,
who knows what
Probably
else?
hide a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
mean,
other
my
things.
God, if it's truly that evil, the world's a dark place, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past anybody. But yeah, I think the mysterious DNA under Sister Margaret's fingernails, I think that's also an interesting aspect. Was there somebody else involved? Was somebody literally got away with this, or was a part of this attack and never was caught? That's crazy to think about too.
That there might be,
There could be somebody else involved.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody completely outside of the church altogether that he had come in, or somebody from this cult he's supposedly a part of. I mean, who knows?
True.
Yeah, lots of possibilities. What do you think, Danny? Any thoughts?
I mean, obviously, I don't have as much experience in the faith as you guys, and I'm also not a man of the cloth. So,
not yet.
I couldn't tell.
I don't have much to say on that front. But as far as him being a murderer, I'm never going to put murder past anybody. I think everybody's capable of it. I think whenever someone says, "Oh, I could never see it," I'm like, there are circumstances in this world that can drive people to do awful things. Yeah. So I'll never put anybody above committing such a horrible act. I don't think he deserved a priest's funeral. I don't think he deserved that. I think being a convicted murderer really kind of goes against the whole thing that priests preach about,
What about the good priest, man?
There's also, I think there was that one commandment. What was it?
It was one of the 10. I think it's the first one.
Yeah, it might be the first one. Yeah.
Of the 10 big rules, it's the first. So I don't know. I don't think he deserved any
grace,
respect, and especially him trying to get grace for the last couple of years of the last couple of days or weeks of his life after the heart attack. He didn't give his victim any grace, so he didn't deserve any either.
Yeah.
Amen. Let's end on that. Big amen to that. So, yeah, let us know your thoughts on this one. What do you think happened? Do you think someone else was involved? You think DNA? I wonder if there's somebody still out there. And obviously, I know a lot of you are going to have a lot of thoughts and feelings around the Catholic Church and their covering up of priest crimes. And curious if anybody out there has any that they're willing to share personal experiences or thoughts around that. I think it's pretty interesting. But yeah, that's going to be it for us today. Appreciate you joining us, and we will see you next time.